let's just take a moment to arrive. So whatever feels right for you, whether it's just taking a deep breath, feeling your feet on the floor, wiggling your neck or your shoulders, I just invite you all to leave your busy day behind you and come into this present moment. For the next hour, we will be sharing this virtual room together. And so let's just land. And as you do so, I'm going to share a poem, which is about green burial. And it's called Bury My Heart. Bury my heart in a breathing forest. Let my body exhale and exude new life. Send me not skyward through a tower of haze, but let the pulsing forces that once sustained me send the sap rising to swaying trees and sweeten the nectar for birds and bees. Swathe me in cloth woven from natural fibers and lay me where I can see my clear path to heaven forming, and my spirit sings of joy to be free. Bury my heart in a breathing forest. Let my love bring the gift of life. So that's by Pearl Forster. And yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I thought I would just give you a quick intro. My name is Carin Bonifacino. I am a 2019 seminary graduate from One Spirit. I see some of my classmates here, class of 2019. I am also currently enrolled in the interspiritual counseling and companioning program at One Spirit, which I highly recommend. It's been really wonderful. And I am a co-founder of an organization in Pennsylvania called Friends of Green Burial, PA for Pennsylvania. We are an education and advocacy organization focused on green burial because, unlike yourselves, who will be very informed by the end of this evening, the vast majority of people have not heard of this option. They don't know it's a thing. They don't know it's legal. So my co-founders and I created this organization so that we could do more education, more workshops. We're reaching out to hospices and funeral homes and all kinds of, places that we're offering classes. And we're also working on the access piece because in many places, the nearest green cemetery is hours away. If you're lucky, you have one nearby, or maybe even two, but in a lot of places, they're still hard to come by. So we're also working on creating more green burial grounds through cemeteries and landowners. So that's just a little bit about me. And I am curious about who I'm speaking to this evening. Just by a show of hands, I'm wondering how many of you are learning about green burial, like maybe for the first time, by a show of hands. Okay, a couple. So the rest of you have read an article or come across information about it. That's great. I just like to know who I'm speaking to. Yeah, so for those of you who are kind of learning about it for the first time, that's fantastic. I'm going to cover a lot of ground. And what I have is just a slide presentation that I'm going to go through. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of green burial real quick before I get to that. But while I'm going through the slides, if questions are popping into your mind, I invite you to jot them down. And once I get through all the slides, then we will have plenty of time for questions and answers and comments and conversation. So thank you for that. So real quick, this whole green burial, or it's also called natural burial, this whole movement started in the UK in the 90s. And it wasn't until 1998 that the concept jumped the pond and landed in South Carolina. And that is where the first official green cemetery began in the United States. So it's been roughly 25 years since the first green cemetery was founded in the United States. And in that intervening 25 years, the movement has picked up speed. And I would say probably in the last 5 to 7 years, it has really started to pick up speed. So between the United States and Canada, there's anywhere from 300 to 400 green cemeteries between the two countries. So there's lots of room for more of those, but they seem to be, starting to pop up more and more. So I'll hope that wherever you are, and I'll talk about where you can find out where green cemeteries are. Hopefully there will be one near you. And yeah, so that's all I really wanted to say about just kind of how long this has, obviously what I'm going to share with you, you'll realize that none of this is really a new idea. I mean, green burial or natural burial is what burial was up until about 100 years ago, when we turned it into an industry and we made it really complicated. It's kind of sad that we have to create a new movement to do things the way they've always been done, but okay. So in any case, I am going, does anybody have any questions, comments, anything before I start sharing my slides? Everybody's good? Okay, great. So let's do this. Okay, can everybody see that? I hope so. I think David would let me know if you couldn't. So as you know, the name of my talk is Green Burial, Sacredness, and Sustainability. And this particular picture that I have on this first slide, I really want to point out this gorgeous wicker casket. As I will talk about, in green burial, you are required to use a fully biodegradable casket or just a shroud. And these wicker caskets are sometimes made of willow, sometimes made of seagrass. And as you can see with this one, some of them are just absolutely beautiful. I will have resources at the end for where you can also find these for sale online and in the United States. I just love how it looks like a basket, and that people are going into the ground essentially in a basket. Makes me think of like baby Moses in the reeds in the basket. But anyway, really beautiful example of what a biodegradable casket can look like, and the artistry and the beauty that is put into some of them. So here we go. So what is green burial? Here's the breakdown. You're starting with an unembalmed body. So the person has died and no chemicals are pumped into them. So the body is intact. as I like to say. You are not putting a concrete vault in the ground. The requirement for vaults comes from the cemeteries themselves. I am pretty sure that no state, occasionally there's a municipality like a town or a county that will require vaults, but typically it is the cemeteries themselves that require it. And that is for the lawnmowers, so that when the ground begins to sink, as the casket degrades and decomposes, the lid of the concrete vault keeps the ground from settling. That's why they use them. In green or natural burial, no concrete vault is required. So the body is going directly into the soil. As I said before, only a fully biodegradable casket or shroud. So no metal, no plastic. Even if it's a pine box, most green cemeteries prefer if it doesn't have nails or screws. So it would be put together, like tongue and groove. And then typically green burial grounds are maintained in a natural state. And so what that means is they're maintained as a meadow or as a woodland if it's already a property that has trees on it, or sometimes it's a mixture of both. But they're maintained in a way that it doesn't look like a cemetery, and they're maintained in a way that is creating habitat for birds, for bees, for butterflies, for mammals. So they're typically really natural looking places. And I have some pictures of those for us. And then the final piece of green burial is there is the invitation, if the family so desire, to participate in some aspects of the burial itself, whether that is lowering the casket into the grave, or whether that's helping to backfill the grave with soil. There is an invitation that people are welcome to participate. So that is the final piece. So as we move up, how did we get here? Why do we need this natural alternative? It is no surprise to you folks that what we are doing with our bodies after death is not good for the planet. As you can see from this picture, this is a pretty low-key cemetery. Those headstones are pretty small and pretty modest, but regardless, we are dumping tremendous amounts of resources into the ground. We're dumping concrete, we're dumping steel, we're dumping chemicals into the ground with these embalmed bodies. And then the cemeteries themselves are maintained with lawnmowers and weed whackers and more chemicals and more fertilizers and herbicides. And so it's kind of sad to say, and I love a good cemetery, let me tell you, like, I love a good cemetery, but they're almost like Superfund sites when you think about how much is under that soil. It's kind of disturbing. So, and then it's expensive, incredibly expensive, which of course is leading more and more people to choose cremation. Understandable, it is cheaper, but unfortunately it's not a green option. The amount of natural gas that is used to burn a single body is the equivalent to approximately a 500-mile car ride or car drive. So if you figure that, some crematories are running from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night, and they're just burning natural gas all that time. Again, a lot of fuel to reduce these bodies to ash. And then of course there's pollution. regardless of how many filters and how many mitigation devices they use on crematories, we are still, or they are still releasing heavy metals and toxic chemicals and all kinds of nasty things into the air that we are all breathing. So this is how we got here. As I said, none of this is a surprise to you folks. And depending on which state you live in, you may also have the option for something called Aquamation, which is not as green burial, but it's a much greener option than modern burial or cremation. And if anyone lives in Washington state, there's another option, which is basically human composting. For most of us, modern burial, cremation, and green burial are the three options that are available to us. So that being said, so if anybody has questions about Aquamation or the other disposition method, let me know at the end and I can tell you a little bit about that. So let's look at a few pictures of some actual green cemeteries. Carolina Memorial Sanctuary in North Carolina is what is called a conservation cemetery. So it's a kind of green cemetery that was created in partnership with a conservation organization. And it's really the best of both worlds. You have land that is being preserved for, generations to come. And the green burial is happening on a section of that property. And then they're using the money that is generated by those green burials to put into the restoration, the maintenance, and the management of the larger preserved land. It's open to the public. It has walking trails. And as you can see, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, you would not know if someone just dropped you there that you were walking in a cemetery, or at least that part of it is a cemetery. And because these burials are, not very invasive or damaging to the earth itself, that can be combined with this model and really minimizes the disturbance to the land and the disturbance to the landscape. So that's the first one. This is one that is not far from where I live. It's right outside of Philadelphia. So this is what is called a hybrid green cemetery. A hybrid cemetery is when you have a modern cemetery, a regular cemetery that requires all the things, the vaults and the headstones, and then they set aside a certain portion of their property for the green burial ground. So Nature's Sanctuary is the green burial ground at West Laurel Hill. And I love this aerial shot because you really get a nice sense of the walking paths and the benches. And this cemetery is currently a meadow. It's beautiful in the summertime with wildflowers. They actually have a beekeeper who keeps beehives just to the left. So it's pretty cool to be at a cemetery and the beehives are over there and you're walking around and it's like, it doesn't look like a cemetery. It doesn't feel like one. It feels like this beautiful natural space. But what they're doing here, which I think is quite lovely, is they have sectioned the green burial ground into, I don't know how big the sections are. Let's say they're a 1/4 acre each, because this whole section here is about an acre. As each section gets filled up with bodies, with burials, they are then going to plant trees so that piece by piece, this meadow will become reforested. And, conceivably 100 years from now, this would be a woodland with the bodies buried underneath, but the bodies underneath also feeding the trees that are now growing on top of what was once a meadow. The other thing that I would like to point out about this picture is along the right-hand edge, the right-hand side, there is a low wall, and it's a little hard to see, but I think you can see that there's a wall. The wall separates the green cemetery from the larger cemetery. And it's also where the names of the people who are buried in that section are engraved. So they do not allow markers because they're trying to maintain this to look as much like a meadow and a wildflower area as possible. So their solution is to put in this wall. All the names of the people who are buried there are engraved in the wall, and everyone is given a GPS coordinate so that they can go to the exact spot. And I believe that's the cemetery in North Carolina does the same. If it's a 100-acre property and you're trying to find, like, where is my person? They give you a GPS coordinate so that you can find the exact spot. So anyway, this is Nature's Sanctuary. It's a really lovely example of what can be done within an existing cemetery. So there's that. And then the last one, so this is a fully wooded cemetery in New Jersey. It's in southern Jersey, down near Ocean City, near Wildwood, if any of you are familiar with those Jersey Shore towns. All of these burials are done in the woodland. They do allow markers, and what they have at this cemetery is a big pile of field stones, flat rocks that people can dig through the pile and find one that they really like. Some people get them engraved, some people paint them, but because it is a rather, I don't know exactly how many acres he has there, but it might be 10 or 15 at least. The burials are all spread out. So you're walking through the woods and you're on just this gorgeous woodland trail, and off to the right, you might see a little mound and a grave marker. And the older ones, of course, have lots of plants that have established on them. The newer graves are a little more obvious because you see fresh soil. But Steelmantown is a beautiful, beautiful cemetery and a really good example of how this can be done even in a wooded area. I imagine the digging is a little difficult because of the roots of the trees, but nevertheless, again, a really good example of how these burial practices can be combined with natural landscapes in a way that doesn't diminish them. That's the word, doesn't diminish them. All right, so let's talk about the sacred aspects of green burial. And I would like to start by talking about what I like to call acts of service, what other people also call acts of service. These invitations that I mentioned that are there, they are not a requirement. If you go, oh my God, there's no way I could backfill a grave, that's really okay. It's just that the invitation is there for those people who would like to. And what I say is, you know, when people are alive, we do things for them because we love them and we care about them. All kinds of things, whether it's our spouse or our children or our best friend, we do things for the people we love because we love them. And these acts are after that person has died, but we still love them and we still care about them. And so, as you can see from the picture on that slide, those folks are picking up the straps that are going to lower that body down into the grave. And, you know, it seems like a really simple thing, but again, if we go back 100 years, these were acts that we all, you know, undertook for our families and friends all the time, before these things were taken away from us by the funeral industry. So to me, the backfilling of the grave, the digging of the grave, the lowering the casket into the ground is a way for families and loved ones to feel more connected to that person, to feel more connected to the process, to the experience, and to the moment itself. I don't know how many of you have been to a graveside service in a regular cemetery lately, but typically the service ends and everyone leaves the cemetery and the casket is still sitting there. And we never get to see that casket go into the ground, because after everyone leaves, then they take the casket and they move it aside and they drop in the vault. And I mean, the whole process takes another half an hour, 45 minutes till they get the crane and all the equipment that they need to, you know, do the thing. Because this is so simple, it can all be done while the family is still standing there. And we get to see that body go down into the grave. And I can assure you that psychologically, it is much healthier for us to see that than to leave the cemetery with the casket still sitting there. There's a final piece that is missing in the process for us. And so anyway, green burial restores that final piece, that going the distance, going all the way. So that's the first part about sacredness. And then I would just like to share with you that this whole process is full of possibility and potential for ritual and ceremony. And because I am speaking to One Spirit folks, I'm choosing to emphasize this. I do not typically go very deep or at all into ritual and ceremony when I'm speaking to, you know, other groups of people. But because this is One Spirit and so many of us, you know, have attended there, I purposely chose to speak more about this piece. So again, from that picture that you can see there, there's a body that's wrapped in a shroud. So there is an opportunity for blessing that body, for laying flowers on it. If it's a casket, that casket can be decorated or blessed. There really are no rules. And even if you have a minister there who is doing a service for you, these are things that can be incorporated in, whether the minister does it or the family and friends do it. It's a little hard to see, but in that picture, I believe that body is also on a wagon. And a lot of green cemeteries will also incorporate a procession to the grave itself. So often there is a wagon or a cart of some kind that the body or the casket is put on. So again, what a beautiful, you know, ceremonial walk or ritual walk, the family and the loved ones accompanying this person to their final resting place. I think it's rare that you see that or you get that in modern burial. And then the grave itself, because you can see the soil, you can see the ground, you have the opportunity to bless that grave, to purify it, to pray over it, to lay evergreen boughs in the bottom before you lower that body, even after the body is lowered, to lay more evergreen branches or to lay more flowers. The grave itself becomes this sacred, receptacle for your loved one. So there's tremendous potential there for incorporating ceremony and sacred practices within the grave and around the grave itself. And then I think that final piece of, even if people decide they don't want to backfill the entire grave themselves, this idea of just passing the shovel, and each person, because of course there's going to be a big pile of soil there, so each person just taking one scoop of soil and dumping it in. It's that moment of connection between our mortal selves and this moment of returning that soil to the earth over our loved ones. A difficult moment, a very realistic moment, but a powerful one where we are able to move through this relationship between life and death a little more clearly and a little more deeply. So that's just some more ideas for ritual and ceremony. And then this final piece, I love this quote. Soul and soil are only separated by one letter after all. And I really believe that our body reconnecting with the land is a sort of grounding into the divine, into the lifeblood of the universe. And I love that soul and soil only separated by one letter. I would argue perhaps that the soil may very well be the soul of the earth herself. And that even as our souls have lifted up and been released from these bodies, that we can pay our debt and return our bodies to the earth and return to her soul, and be grounded in that connection. So yeah, so that's one final piece, is just that this returning the body to the earth in and of itself is a sacred act. And here are some resources for you all. And so, yeah, feel free to take a picture of these or jot them down. The Green Burial Council is where you will find a directory of green cemeteries in your state. Wonderful website, tons of resources there, but I think the directory is probably the most helpful. The next 3 websites are places where you can get caskets. And you may or may not be aware that you are under no obligation to buy a casket from a funeral director. Many funeral directors will tell you, I can get you a pine box, I can get you a biodegradable casket, and they can. But you can also still probably get them cheaper elsewhere. So Titan Casket Company, you can go online, you can order a wicker casket, you can order a pine box. They will ship it either directly to your house, or they will ship it to the funeral home. If the body is being kept cold and waiting in the funeral home to be buried, you could ship it directly to the funeral home. The next website, Funerary Artisans Collective. This is a group of artists who are making wicker caskets, biodegradable urns, shrouds, all kinds of gorgeous handmade, eco-friendly funeral products. So even if you're going to get cremated, or someone who wants to get cremated, but you would still like those ashes in a biodegradable urn. This is a wonderful collective of folks who you can go on their website and learn about them and what they do and support United States artists who are making, beautiful, beautiful stuff. The final one, Casket Builder Supply, you can order a casket kit for about $500 if you're that kind of person, and have it on the ready. I actually keep one on the ready at our place so that if a family member, if a friend, if anybody needs one, it's already pre-cut, pre-drilled, and you get to perform another act of sacred service, actually building a casket with your own hands for someone. And then the final website is my organization. If you live in the state of Pennsylvania, we have our own directory on there, educational resources and things like that. So that is it. So I thank you and would love to hear comments, questions, confusion. Yeah, go ahead. Just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm Kyle. I'm a volunteer with the Funeral Consumers Alliance.
Hi,
and
Kyle.
We are also trying to get up as many resources as we can about green burials.
Yeah.
And we've noticed that there's green cemeteries that are not listed on the Green Burial Council website.
Correct.
Because they have like very high standards. And there's a lot of cemeteries that are basically green, but don't quite meet the standards. So they're not there and people aren't finding them.
Yeah.
So I always feel like I want to tell people to find them, like Google green cemeteries in your area, you will find more things than is on the Green Burial Council websites. Because people need to know that they're around, as you know.
It is an excellent point, Kyle. And it's one of those things that it kind of mystifies me that these cemeteries don't get certified by the Green Burial Council. Because if there is this national umbrella organization that is offering the directory,
Right.
like, why wouldn't you want to be listed on it? But you're correct. It is much harder to find those cemeteries because they're not listed on the directories.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Feel free to just Google green cemeteries, because then some may come up that are not listed on that Green Burial Council website. You are 100% correct. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was just curious about logistics.
Yeah.
When someone passes away, you would call the funeral home, but you would let them know that you're going to be doing a green burial. So obviously they wouldn't do the embalming and.
Correct.
And do you need to know where they're going to be buried right away, or?
If someone dies unexpectedly, which we know happens, and you don't have a plot already purchased, certainly you can reach out, if you know, like, oh, there's a green cemetery, 10 miles away. You could reach out to them, buy a plot, and at the same time be reaching out to a funeral director and saying, and I would be very clear upfront, not that they're going to do this, if you like, we do not want embalming. We're going to do a green burial, and they will just keep the body cold. They will keep it refrigerated, which is what they do with bodies at the morgue and, places like that. So yeah, most funeral homes are going to be very happy to have your business green burial or not. I will say occasionally you might, depending on where all you folks live, you might pick up the phone and the first funeral home you call might not know a lot about it. I'm shocked at how many funeral directors are like, oh yeah, we're green burial friendly. And they really know nothing about it. They just like the word. But you might get a little pushback from a funeral director. And I would say if they're kind of like, oh, well, we're not so sure about that, just call somebody else and you'll find a funeral director who will be like very happy to help you, and they'll know what the requirements are. But yeah, it's just like any other burial or even cremation. You would still hire a funeral director to kind of, be your liaison and do really all you need is just the transporting of the body. Keep it cold and do the transportation. Yeah.
So since they're not embalming, how long would you have to be able to, before you would have to bury someone?
I mean, I think they can keep the bodies cold for a very long time. Typically, if you're going to do a burial, you would probably still have it within a week, but you could also ask the funeral director themselves and say, you're going to pay for it. I don't know what they're going to charge. They're going to charge you something, but like, hey, we need a couple weeks because we're trying to get more people in. Can you keep them cold for 2 weeks? I think they can. I absolutely think they can. It's where if you want to do a viewing, then the body would have to be embalmed. But if you're going to do a green burial, then you're not going to do that, modern kind of viewing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just curious, you talked about the environmental impacts, which makes it so appealing. I'm curious about like cost, not, just generally, like a green burial compared to like going through the funeral home, like how do they stack up? That would be really helpful to know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So definitely cheaper than modern burial with all the bells and whistles. Typically not as cheap as cremation, but it really depends where you live. If you want a green burial and you live near a major urban center, it's going to cost a lot more than if you live in a rural area. But I would say typically you're looking at more like $2,000 to $5,000, $3,000 to $5,000. I've seen the plots themselves, Mary Beth, just purchasing the plot at a green cemetery. I've seen everything from $500 to $5,000. So location, right, it really makes a difference. But I want to say typically it's probably going to cost $1,500 to $2,000 is probably a better ballpark for the plot. But then no concrete vault, no embalming, no giant headstone, no expensive casket. So cheaper than modern burial, probably still a little more than cremation. Does that help? Yeah, okay. Yeah, the costs really vary across the United States. Yeah.
I just wondered if they typically have some memorial there in the park with people's names on or something like that.
Yeah, so some of the cemeteries will allow markers. So there might be like a flat stone that is marking the actual grave site. And many others will have a wall or some decorative feature where the names of the people buried there are engraved, typically with their dates. Yeah. Yeah, so there's even just for genealogy purposes, that record needs to be there for posterity. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. And I wanted to ask you, you didn't mention cardboard.
Another fantastic option. Absolutely. Yeah. I know what I love about cardboard is that you can really decorate it you can paint it and, you know, do lots of fun stuff with it. Absolutely. $100 for a cardboard casket and you're good to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I just want to share an experience, which my father died about 3.5 years ago, and he very much wanted to be buried in a green way. He died suddenly, unexpectedly, but his wife and he had talked about it. But his wife really wanted, and probably the family as well, really wanted some sort of a memorial or marker. And what wound up happening was that she called around to her local cemeteries and found a private local cemetery where they would allow a green burial, although it was within a cemetery environment. And so I just want to put it out there that that is another possibility.
Yes.
You know, if somebody's got, you know, if some family has their heart set on a stone and on being able to visit a place, other cemeteries in the area would not allow a green burial, but this one would. And I doubt that he was. Certainly he was. There were many people there who were buried in a more traditional way who had been embalmed, but he was not. He was put in a shroud and in an open wooden box. And
nice. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Robin. I mean, it's interesting. As consumers, right? I hate that word, but as consumers, we have a lot of power. And if you would like a green burial or you would like one for your loved one, I would encourage you to call your local cemetery and say, this is what I'm looking for. You know, could we do, as Robin said, could we do a burial without a vault? Or have you thought about setting aside a section for this? Because I really believe that the more they get those requests, the more they're going to realize, like, oh, we're missing the boat, you know. So thank you, Robin. That's a very good point. Some cemeteries will be flexible about that, and some will not. So perfect. Thank you. Do you know any place in the United States that provides sky burial? I do not. Yeah, I don't think that is legal in the US. So a sky burial would be where a body is just laid out in the open so that, you know, vultures and animals can consume it. And thus the body is, you know, returned to the earth through the bodies of the animals. Aquamation that I mentioned, just since we're talking about options, it's kind of like water cremation. The body is dissolved in a chamber, much like a retort in a crematory. The body is put in a chamber, and water and alkali are circulated around the body so that it breaks down. I think 9 or 10 states allow for aquamation. So, and it uses much, much, much less energy than cremation. And then natural organic reduction is what was just legalized in Washington state a couple years ago. Some of you folks may have heard of it. It's basically human composting. And it's really exciting because obviously in rural areas where there's land, it's great to set up these green cemeteries and do it more naturally. But the natural organic reduction would be a really wonderful alternative in more urban areas and more densely populated areas. The water, I believe, so there was a question about what is done with the water after aquamation. I believe it is returned to the waterways. I think it's just flushed right back out into the sewer system. So yeah, it's treated and goes back into the system. Yeah. Do different religious funeral homes and cemeteries put up boundaries to doing this? I don't know if any, I mean, certain religious traditions definitely lean this way. You know, Judaism and Islam both do what is essentially natural burial, an unembalmed body going directly into the soil. So I know that certain religious traditions prefer this method. I don't know of any that are putting up boundaries to it. Unfortunately, the cemeteries themselves can often be the biggest obstacles. It's hard for some of these folks to really wrap their heads around doing things differently. At least that has been my experience. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, Josh. Okay. Yeah. I see you with your hand up. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I really so much appreciate this.
Great.
Actually, two things. I really, really do, because when my very beloved dog died in 2010, and it was within a year and a half of both parents dying 8 months from each other. And I'm just going to digress for a moment. This is one of the things I wanted to mention. My father was a devout Quaker, and I grew up as a Quaker with him.
Yeah.
And when we had to take care of his cremation burial, not too much in the way of doodads in Quaker cemeteries. This is the way they are. In fact, my brother gave me the job of finding the urn. So I went to go look for urns, and they're fancy and they're beautiful and they're this and that. And I felt so uncomfortable. And I knew so I went to my nursery here on Long Island, a big nursery, Hicks Nursery, and I got a clay pot.
Nice.
And a saucer underneath and a saucer on top. And that's how we buried him. And I thought he would be tickled pink.
Beautiful, beautiful.
The other thing, when my dog died, real quick, it's 7:58 now. I did everything I could. I didn't know really about green burials. And, you know, I thought, well, he's a dog, maybe I could bury him. Well, there's laws. Well, but I'm in shock, you know, and he was aging and he had to go. So I took him to the vet who was going to come to the home so they could meet. Day before Thanksgiving, I didn't realize it then, but I was in a journey of ceremony. The day before Thanksgiving, she came. We went through the process. One of our best friends in our dog play group, she was there. And when she drove the car with him in my lap to the crematorium, I handed him over and I went to the crematory.
Perfect.
And I saw how he went in there, and it was as if I was being pulled in there with him, which I realized that was my attachment. Yeah. And it was hard, that moment of attachment. So at the gravesite, people to participate if they wish, I can see how that could sort of meld attachment, detachment, and create the softening of the blow, if you will.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing it. I am a huge advocate that if a loved one is getting cremated, I always suggest to people that they accompany the body to the crematory if they are able, and, you know, to witness it. I love this line from Thomas Lynch, who wrote The Undertaking. He's a funeral director. It was like a famous book 20 plus years ago about the funeral industry. And he says, what do we owe the dead? And his answer to that question is to go the distance with them. And to me, that accompanying the body to the crematory, or that lowering the body into the grave, it's like, we're going the distance. You know, we've loved you in life. We're here with you in death. We're going the distance. So beautiful story about accompanying your dog. And in a weird way, but in a not surprising way, it does soften the blow, and it eases the grief process. And we are denied these experiences over and over and over again in this culture, and we have lost so much by virtue of it. So anyway, again, I love that you just knew you needed to take him there yourself. So kudos. Yeah. And so Josh had a question about bodies crossing state lines. Yes, Josh, bodies can cross state lines. You typically would need a permit. A funeral director can do it. I mean, a regular person can do it, but you just have to get the permit, and typically that permit would come from a funeral director. Okay, but they absolutely can cross state lines. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here. Be well. Feel free to reach out if you have questions after tonight. If I can be a resource for you in any way, you can shoot me an email through Friends of Green Burial PA, and I'll get back to you. David, thank you so much. All right, everyone. Take care. Be well. Good night. Bye-bye. Soul and soil are only separated by one letter after all. And I really believe that our body reconnecting with the land is a sort of grounding into the divine, into the lifeblood of the universe.